everybody, and welcome to this on-demand webinar powered by demandDrive. My name is AJ Alonso. I am the host, and I'm here with Sean Adams. He's the head of sales and partnerships over at IORAD. Sean, how you doing?
AJ, I'm doing great, man. Good to see you again. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Hey, anytime. Seriously. You and I, we've had some good back and forth on LinkedIn. Love the dialogue that we have there, and I'm happy that we can bring it to this medium and talk a little bit about today. The topic's going to be sort of the dark social, inbound to outbound, outbound to inbound, evangelizing SDRs, and all that good stuff. Before we get into the meat of stuff, because I know we've got a lot to talk about today, I'm going to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself, a little bit of background about who you are, what you do, the old Sean Adams 101, so to say.
Yeah, for sure. Really quick overview, backstory. I started at the beginning of my career in the small business world, owned a couple of different companies, primarily in the home service space. Actually sold one of those companies, did a bunch of sort of consulting work explaining how I was able to use technology and document systems and processes to scale small businesses, and actually was using a ton of software to help them get streamlined and automated, and did consulting helping businesses like that do the same. And got into this weird world of SaaS, like right around 2013, 14, when it was even more crazy than it is now. And ended up joining one of the SaaS companies that I was kind of promoting and evangelizing as a salesperson, as an account executive, and then just fell in love with the whole concept and all the potential that was in this space. And I've spent the next 5, 6, 7 years, whatever it's been now, with a couple of different companies. The latest one being IORAD, which I'm the head of sales and partnerships, which is an interactive tutorial building technology. So think anytime you're taking a screenshot to explain how to do a task in a piece of software, we have a really simple way to build it as an interactive simulation versus it being just this like static image. So we're out here trying to tackle the world of process documentation, help make things easier from a training perspective for folks.
Very cool. Very cool. So you kind of fell into the SaaS world, which is what I hear a lot from people who kind of like stumble in, fall in, whatever you want to call it, accidentally end up being an SDR or AE. And it's like, oh, wait a minute, this is pretty cool. Like there's a lot of earning potential here. You can learn a ton, you can grow a ton. So very cool to see that you fell your way in and have now moved up, and also very cool that you were promoting technology and then you're like, hey, let me just work for some of these places. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, you'll notice as we talk through this conversation, I'm a big fan of being your own customer first, or trying to evangelize, being a customer advocate as our first primary role in any kind of customer-facing role, especially in sales, whether we're top of funnel or any spot within that kind of workflow. It's really important to me. I came from that. That's where I've seen the most success. That's where I see real business conversations, and the best pieces of feedback have been when I've taken the time to, well, it was really helpful when I used to be my former customer. That was really helpful. But if I can't do that, how can I speed up my learning curve? And that's some of the things we're going to talk about today. So I'm really passionate about that topic.
Yeah. Awesome. And let's just jump into it. I know the original sort of like meat that we wanted to discuss today was this idea for SDRs to kind of work the outbound to inbound motion. Some people call it dark social. This sort of like almost attributionless way for an organization to look at where they're growing a book of business, where their pipeline is coming from, and figuring out a way to kind of like tie that back to the SDR team. One of the like hidden values, I would say, of like what that function can really provide to an organization. So in your words, talk a little bit about maybe some experience you've had with that, what your take on that is, and then we can kind of go back and forth there.
Yeah, so if I were to back up a step and just talk from like a high level setting, I would say that conceptually it's this idea of show versus tell. So I think there's been this big issue in SaaS where with the SDR function, the cold call to peak interest, that whole concept, we've missed the mark, or the buyer has matured to a state in which there's no real value being exchanged in a typical SaaS buying cycle until after a purchase is being made. That's a really big problem for a lot of buyers. And it's an even bigger problem because a lot of selling organizations do not recognize this. What I mean by that is if I'm cold calling someone, cold emailing, reaching out to them, all I'm doing is talking about the potential of my words that I'm going to do a thing for them, or that this product is going to produce a certain result. I'm not showing anything. Like there's actually no value being exchanged at all. They're basically hoping that the person believes them, that they're going to do, or that the product does what they are saying it's going to do. And then they move through this process of continuing to trust that buyer a little, or that seller a little bit more until they give them money, and then the value gets kicked in after purchase, which is kind of a backwards way of buying, and how like consumers buy, and a lot of the emotional triggers that we talk about, in social psychology, things like this. And so this whole idea is like, how do we actually build trust through showing value, right? And these tend to be things like content, things like free trials, proof of concepts, third-party validation, these concepts where someone can hear from someone else or experience on their own the value early on, or a piece of the value. You don't have to give away the farm. I'm not talking about, giving everything that your company has to offer for free. I'm talking about you have to give and show some of these things, and we can talk about some tactical ways that happens. But I just wanted to set that stage, and I think that that's the real gap in the space, and where I think that the tactics we're going to talk about today are about just really trying to fill that in, and telling that better story that I still don't think a lot of selling orgs are really understanding.
I tend to agree with you in that a lot of the pitches that I don't get prospected a ton, but I get prospected enough from SDRs, and a lot of it is like you were talking about. It's heavy feature dumping. It's kind of like the potential of what this could look like at your organization, but there's no way for me to kind of like push the rep aside or envision a way where I can see this working at my company that is more than just a vision. There's no tangible value that I can hold on to unless it is a proof of concept or some type of like, hey, we've built a tool that you can use that kind of shows the value of what we can do in an organization like yours. So I'm fully with you there. It's something that I experience on a fairly regular basis, and it's why a lot of the emails that I get in my inbox, frankly, get deleted, or why I ignore virtually 99% of all of the cold calls that I get, because I know that at the end of the day, even if it is something that I desperately need or want, I'm probably the person engaging with a salesperson rather than them engaging with me. And I know that that's part of like where I sit in the funnel, and sort of, you talked about the modern buyer today. They're more engaged and more active in research than ever before. So they inject themselves deeper in the funnel, so that like that potential and heavy education from an SDR at the top level is almost unnecessary unless I happen to be one of the 2% of people in market and problem aware and haven't done anything yet, which is rare. Maybe 2%, maybe.
Spot on. I mean, that's exactly it, right? And it's the recognition of that pipeline. And if I'm the individual, SDR, I'm following the rules, right? I'm doing what I am told to do, and I'm following a playbook. And so, to some extent, that's just the nature of the structure that they're in. They can't go to their management team and request all these changes. But I think the measurement is probably the first place to start, which is like, how do we gauge success? And I think, and again, this is it's an easy thing to say. It's a harder thing to actually deliver.
All of this is going to be really difficult to execute.
Of course.
Theory is fun.
Yes. That's why I love podcasts. I can just pontificate about all this stuff and not have to execute any of it. No, these are things that we actually build, right? And we actually do subscribe to. Definitely not easy, but they are simplistic and more of a mindset shift here. So if we back up a bit and say, okay, well, like, what does the value food chain look like here? The measurement that we're using tends to be meetings. And if we take my initial point, which was that we don't really add any value, even if the account executive meets with them and they're doing a demo of the product, no real value exchange there either, right? So we need to speed up even or back up even more and say, how do we start that more top of funnel? And so maybe it's more about the measurement of the SDR function. And, we talked offline about some of these tools like Clearbit and some of the website trafficking tools, which I think is a really important, more of a management like philosophy that we can look at, which is like the SDR role be branched over a little bit more into marketing. So that's more about influenced demand gen, about activity and interest and free trials or activations of trials, free accounts, things like this, where we can start to see that the impact that we're making out there with, getting people onto a webinar or connecting parties on LinkedIn or, at an event, trying to sort of collaborate on a thought leadership topic. That's indirectly a pitch for us. It's much more about the camaraderie and community and those sort of things. And then we see on the tail end that's driving traffic back to our site. Mm-hmm. That to me is one of those shifts where we can go, okay, well, if we can change that compensation structure or look at that and say, well, maybe this is like a global bonus structure that the organization gets after a certain traffic is hit, or some kind of qualified lead or impact or whatever that looks like, versus this fixation on meetings when the meeting isn't really the value. So that would be another piece I would say, like maybe from a management strategy perspective, can we look at traffic and other ways that we are sort of impacting that funnel versus just this like ad hoc, here's meetings and hope they turn into something, because that's actually, from the customer's words, not where they're finding value or why they're working with you.
Interesting that you say from the customer's words. I do want to get to that in a second, but I think what you just spoke about kind of really speaks to the value of alignment here, right? Like you said, maybe SDR shift a little bit more onto the marketing side, but like traditionally they have that bridge between sales and marketing, acting as sort of that feedback loop between like marketing develops this messaging, they execute from a sales side of things, they deliver anecdotal feedback back to sales, they take that, bring it to marketing. It's this nice little virtuous cycle. But I do think that there needs to be tight alignment between teams for that to actually work, in the sense that like if sales only cares about closing deals and marketing only cares about whether or not their MQLs are being followed up on, then everything you just said can't work. For SDRs to actively be doing outbound and then taking people from that motion into going to an event or attending a webinar or going to the site, and then for marketing to track that and then feed it back to sales, these teams need to work in lockstep to be able to do that. And unfortunately, that's not the case at a lot of organizations today, but is sort of that like ultimate goal for SDRs to both benefit marketing and sales equally.
Yeah, for sure. My suggestion is always to start on customer success for these sort of things when you're trying to get
another team you got to bring in.
Well, yeah, I mean, you want to talk to the customer who's paying you and actively, subscribe to your product or service, right? And if you can unpack them as a case study, even if it does not something that gets publicized, but something internally that you're trying to derive insights from, you have conversations where you say, like, walk me through that buying cycle. What was valuable? What wasn't? Here's what we tried to put together as our strategy. Did any of that resonate? They're like, yeah, well, I don't even know what that word means. That wasn't it. And it was actually this thing that the AE did, or it was actually this piece of content on your website, or it was actually Mary in that Slack channel when I was asking about your product, who said that she uses you and is a really big fan, right? That was another big buying trigger. And when we take those insights from post-sales, where someone's happy and successful and doing their thing, we can help basically drive, conviction, I'll say, for sales and marketing to align a little bit more on what that customer wants to see, how we can be more advocates for them and focus on things like content and maybe collaboration with associations or ecosystems and communities. Like, where are these people aggregating? Where are those conversations being had? And how and why are they buying those things, right? Are they asking peers because they don't trust what they see on the website? Are they asking peers because it's really competitive and they just want to know if it's you versus another tool? If so, what were those differentiators? Like, there is a world of insights to be had from the customer. We call them customer insight interviews. And we have a whole structure that we go through, pretty straightforward, but it's just like unearthing your actual buyer's words. And then that turns into not only like external top of funnel content, but it's also just like actual sales education for your pre-sales team. Like SCRs, AEs, that whole world, they need to really understand that language at a deep level, not what someone told them to say, but what the customer is actually saying is valuable to them. And those things should be the same thing, and they rarely are.
Yeah. And I think it also helps an SDR understand like their impact at an organization, right? Like they get told 99% of the time, no. They get rejected regularly. And to think that like maybe the 1% of time, like realistically, a lot of the time they hear nothing from somebody, absolute dead silence. But in reality, their messaging could have percolated through an organization. Somebody could have looked you up online. They could have talked to a friend, like you said, in a Slack community or whatever. And then through a couple of other different steps, they inbound to an organization. An attribution for that is going to say Google. But the real seed of that is the SDR doing outreach or doing some type of high-level education. And for a rep to understand that, like, yes, you end up never heard from someone at this account, but the work that you do still has value because of all of these things we've heard from our customers as to how they've come inbound to us or how they found out about us, shows that the work that you do matters. And there's like a real long-term value here for SDRs to not get frustrated and burnt out when they know that like the work that they do actually does matter. And it's not just the 2% of time they hear a yes from somebody. It is a lot of the work that they're doing, and a lot of the messaging that they're putting out there actually still holds weight. It isn't just sitting above their head as like, oh, I've done nothing today. Like, you sent out 80 emails. There is something of value in there. It's just how you extract that value as an organization. Where I don't think a lot of companies are really set up to do that properly, but it sounds like you guys have kind of built a process and figured that out internally, which is great.
Yeah, and using those customer words to know how to talk to people, where to meet them, like these are really fundamental pieces. You're right. When I go in with my intention and my goal to derive a meeting out of this, I'm going in with these weird expectations of how this relationship's going to go. And that's misaligned. And that's usually what causes most of the frustration, because you just like, I did what you told me to do and it didn't, the machine didn't spit out the commission check that I expected it to, right? And like, that's because of the whole misalignment of what I'm talking about. And like, I think it's more of this, or I think the shift for SDR as a function is gonna be more of like product or brand evangelists. So if you look at tools like Lavender and some of the bigger brands out there, they're not hiring cold callers and cold emailers. What they're doing is they're finding people out there from the space who get the value of the product and are talking broadly about the concepts and the thought leadership topics that matter to those personas. And so if I'm running an SDR function and I can hear from my customers what's valuable, why I keep paying you, and then the SDR start to see that and they start to hear like, this is actually really valuable, right? I'm not just in a job because someone's going to pay me to make cold calls. No. If I can actually be bought into the value that we're deriving for customers, right? I use Fathom, the note-taking app, so I talk about them all the time, right? Like, I do all kinds of weird stuff for them just because I like their product and I use it every day. Like, I don't even get incentivized to do it, but it's just, I'm an evangelist for their thing because it solves so many pain points for me, as does IORAD and our own tool, right? So like, you can tell when someone believes in the tool or believes in the service and when they can describe that. And I think that's a huge piece that gets missed. And so when it becomes more of this evangelist play, well, now you're just trying to like share helpful insights from other customers. So we've done things like, instead of the outreach being, do you have 27 seconds for a call? Or do you have like all these templates? Like, I don't think it's a tactic or a tweak in templates. I think it's a tweak in the mindset of what we're delivering. So if I pull it, ABC happy customer, and I pull this great case study out and we make that into like a before, during, and after state of like how they worked with us, what they found, those themes, then I take that to the cold market and I'm just talking about those concepts with prospects. And I'm like, listen, hey, we just work with ABC. I noticed X about your site. They seem to be in a similar position. No pressure here, but we did like a whole breakdown of what was valuable to them. If it's helpful, I'm happy to share that along, right? And then it's just like this report of basically someone that looks just like them, that started where they currently are, worked with us, got these results, and are now happy working here. By the way, you can connect with them if you want as well. Like, sometimes we've seen that be its own flywheel. It has nothing to do with the meeting. It has nothing to do with any ask for the most part. It's really just like, can I plant a seed of curiosity? And that shift is just not there. Again, because of the measurements, right. We're looking at a shorter term, view, which does skew the numbers a bit.
Yeah. It's like you said at the beginning, reps are typically measured by meetings. Like, you as an SDR are told you've been successful if you hit 100% of your meeting quota for the month. But that is a very short-term view of how to measure success. Whereas if you can continue to plant seeds over a longer period of time, that will likely create a more sustainable pipeline for you. But people don't want they do want a long-term sustainable pipeline, but they also really want those short-term wins. And I think that balance, right, for an SDR function to work in market individuals and try to book meetings with them, but also dedicate part of their time to get people who aren't even maybe problem aware in their buyer journey and start to plant those seeds. I don't see a lot of that happening with SDRs today, in terms of like a good responsibility shift away from just short-term wins and balancing long-term wins. I don't know how you might suggest an organization do that or structure their team in such a way where that's like possible, or is that even possible to look at both the short term and the long term?
Yeah, so I would say if we're taking like strategic selling and we're looking at it from that lens, like it's gonna be really difficult if you sell like to SMB and you've got like sub, $15,000 ARR products. Like it's gonna be really tough. To just grind. Like that's a totally different game. Not that that's always the right way, but it's just kind of the nature of the beast in some of those. But if we take like our top tier accounts, enterprise accounts, or like whatever, just something that's, let's say more than 25K in ARR value, just for a rudimentary number, the way that you're reaching out, every single touch point is either a net negative or a net positive on the kind of score, right? You're either eroding your possibility of working with them, or you're moving yourself 1 degree closer to working with them or being on their awareness schedule. And so if we think about that sort of stuff, then we're like unpacking what are the little nuggets that we can deposit to move that count along. So when we're breaking that down, we take an enterprise account, we're using Sales Navigator and we're going in and we're pulling all kinds of plays out with the SDRs. So we would be first looking at like who from our customer base knows someone there. All right, let's start there. So can we unpack and connect a few people? Reaching out to all those connections. The people that we're connecting with are part of this network effect, and we're aggregating all of those contacts as well. Within all of those contacts, we are following each one of them on LinkedIn. We're following their content on LinkedIn. We're following the communities that they are in, and we're tracking the data points on all of those different contacts. What are they measured on? What are they talking about? Who are they connected with, right? So this is now where we're painting the landscape of like a strategic account or someone worth sinking this kind of time in. And when you have this level of importance on these target accounts, you can spend this level of time being long-winded. Because if you're in a tight niche, like you can't afford to burn a bridge with an account, right? So you have to be strategic. It's just a reality of how this works. Maybe strategy, and this happens to us all the time, is I have to get them on a teeny tiny micro plan for now. I have to sell them a little tiny product or a freemium subscription or a land and expand proof of concept because we can't get them to commit to the giant thing yet. Like that's also a strategy, right? And so by weaving in all these stories, we have all these contacts that we're pulling in. Well, now when I'm reaching out on LinkedIn or I am sending out cold emails, maybe it's connecting them to, like if I sell to CMOs, I'm connecting to my CMO. Like, hey, we're doing a little session. We're going to talk about these topics. We've sold these companies that we're working with. These people on LinkedIn are going to be there. And maybe just a panel chat, right? You're not leveraging the SDR who doesn't have the network, who doesn't have the business acumen. We're leveraging our own internal team. Right. So it's this like aggregating of contacts and planting a seed wherever we can. So we have like their management team with our management team. Their extended contacts are now our extended contacts. Their content becomes insights for us. And like when you're making these little tiny seeds all over the place, it starts to be, just a groundswell at some point. Sometimes it takes a year or two to get there. But when you're talking about a valuable account, it's worthwhile to build these things this way. That was just one example of just like having a couple of tactical ways to think about this. It's got to be very strategic if the account's worth it.
Yeah. We actually talked about this on a different webinar that we ran. Shameless plug. Go listen to Adrienne Chen talk about this. But she called it surround sound sales. This idea that like you have different business units within your organization that are responsible for different aspects of penetrating an account. So a lot of people talk like, oh, you've got to go top down or bottom up based on who you're reaching out to. But if you can go in from all angles and have SDRs do high-level education for the manager level while also having your directors and VPs connect with other directors and VPs and invite them to events and have C-levels connect with one another, like you're talking about, it gets to the point where you've carved out so much space in their brain for your name, your brand, what you do, that when it comes time for them to either make a decision about, hey, we actually want to pursue initiatives in whatever space you're doing, it'd be stupid for them not to connect with you because you've made so many deposits over the course of months to years that you're top of mind. And that's really the goal I see with all of this idea that like for high level target accounts, not for just everybody, but these accounts that you really want to break into, you have to take this approach because everything else to them is going to just be noise. There's just too much outreach happening right now for you to only rely on an SDR who maybe doesn't have the greatest business acumen, who's just fresh out of college, and all they do is make phone calls and send emails, and they don't understand like the bigger picture of everything. That's typically just not going to get it done anymore for these high value target accounts that you have, nor should you have them, like you said, erode away at your chance at working with them and possibly burn a bridge by having someone who frankly might not have the capacity to understand what they're really doing, and they're just shooting out emails like they're told to.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think enough sales orgs think about like reputation management and the work that they do, that like the sales function that they run. You're eroding or you're helping your reputation, or it's like static and not moving, which is losing for the most part. So like, these are important factors to think about. So if you're more down market, you're not working on those target accounts. One of the things that we don't see enough, especially SaaS products, is like, what is a free trial, or you mentioned like a calculator on the website or a template, or, there's a million different ways that this can be structured. What's that like little nugget of value of like industry jargon, industry like process that they can get their hands on and click around and start to experience? For those like mid-market and even SMB types of accounts, if there's something they can click around with or download or play around and see, or like, I don't know, just mirror and watch from a distance, kind of uninterrupted, it's so powerful. I know like the freemium model, product-led growth, like these things get talked about all the time. I don't know if you try to buy anything recently that's more than like a couple $1,000, everything makes you book a demo, right? Like it's just, that's the whole flow still. And it's like, dude, I don't want to book it. I'm not ready for that yet. Like
sometimes you can't even see pricing. They fully hide that behind the forced you to talk to sales motion. So
sometimes, yeah. I mean, it's more the exception than the rule when I see like clear pricing on a website that's not something sub $100 a month.
Right.
If it's like $9 a month and it's Notion or whatever, like, yeah, sure, that's there. But like any B2B product, like they don't disclose pricing, and it's like, why? Why not set the stage? Because like if I'm SMB and you start at $1,000 a month, I'm like, yeah, there's no way that if you start there, I instantly disqualify myself. So it's a whole other tangent, but like that alone is not helpful. But like if they're able to try before they buy, or that show the value before they can, instead of seeing the value, be just talking about the value, that's another great piece, because what you can start to do is you can take like the expertise you've derived from your customer base. If you can formulate that into like templates, takeaways, talk tracks, depending on what your product or service is, now you get people that are playing around and like thinking about these problems, or downloaded something, joined a session, are using your tool. Now you can tease out templates or giveaways based on this thing. Because now you know who they are, kind of know what they're doing or what they might be moderately interested in. Now I can place a very strategic asset in their hands, like a template, like a talk track, like here's what one of your colleagues did in this case for this thing, right? Like those sort of things are very powerful for people to see, because they're trying to solve their problem, which is very unique to them, but they know that other people have thought about it and solved it. They just don't know how to get that information in front of them and critique it for their own scenario. So that would just be a couple of ways. Again, you could just sort of position some of these takeaways as a management team to make sure your SDRs are like, they're friction removers. They're just these little things like very strategically, just I'm just going to leave this here and walk away, like those sort of deposits.
Yeah, I like the way that you describe that, friction removers. And it speaks really to this like shift that we've seen from a seller heavy function to a guide heavy function. Like we've talked about it a bunch. People inject themselves in the funnel deeper than before, way more research than ever. Buyers hold the power, yada, yada, yada. We've heard it a million times, but it does speak to how people actually want to buy now. And there's plenty of studies out there that show that buyers, it's like 44% of buyers prefer seller-less experiences, and that number jumps even higher with millennials. And I'm sure for Gen Z, it's going to triple at some point. They never want to do anything outside of like buy something on their phone, but broad generalization by me. But still, like the need for heavy education and hard sells from an SDR function at this point is almost non-existent. And a need to guide someone to a decision is where a lot of teams that are succeeding are showcasing that that's like how they've trained their function. And you don't see it a lot. And I think this idea of making these deposits and kind of like backing away, being like, we're here when you need us, and we're getting in early, and we're showing you the value that we can bring now, so that come time for you to actually evaluate a solution, you know where to go. that's how, in the long run, you're going to win business. Um,
Yeah.
I'm fully on board with it. I think it's great. I think some of the tactics that you've laid out are genius for teams of all sizes to take a look at. Because going into this, I was looking at the notes that we put together and thinking back to the conversations that we've had, and a lot of it is kind of like, in my mind, almost reserved for enterprise level organizations. The tactics that you've talked about, some people would think as, oh, well, I can do that if I'm working, $100,000, $200,000 deals. But you're talking about being able to do it for $10,000 deals, for ACVs that are in the SMB and lower side of things. Like, these are things that you can adopt and bring into an organization and think more strategically rather than just go with your SDR team, which is a breath of fresh air from someone who gets prospected often with bad messaging.
Totally. I mean, I get it every single day as well, right? I'm that guy that, every 10th one or so that I get when I get time, I will rewrite the email and send it back to them. Like, here's what
Yeah.
because it just drives me crazy, because like, this is a profession I want to stay in, and every one of these bad messages, not only does it erode your brand, but it erodes the profession. So now, like, my emails are that much less likely to get opened and responded to because you keep doing a bad job. So like, it's important for me to help you level up so that like the profession levels up. So I totally understand that, but that's where I think this content is super powerful, and it's not above the SDRs to be ones who could be curating it. Maybe if they can create it, fantastic. I understand that that's always a stretch for a lot of orgs, but curation is also super powerful. Taking your take on things, or taking real customer problems. Like, I think that they're given like the buzzwords that the sales manager gave them that are important, but they're not like really understanding the problems. And when you're sitting on demos, you're sitting on post-sales support calls, and you're hearing like, I had this thing and now this is really helpful for me. And then they can position that out there, and they can really be talking broadly about these problems and that day in the life that's so specific to that niche. Like, you can't help but be attracted to that thing. It's a scroll stopper when you see something that's super relevant. It's like learning design professionals, why instructional, like we sell to a lot of L&D folks. It's such a weird space that like I knew nothing about before I came in. Now the terminology, like when I put something together, it's very specific in that vocab. And like 99% of people would scroll right past it. They have no idea what I'm talking about. But the 1%, they're like, this is exactly the problem I have, right? Like, you need those level of checkboxes, and you sort of want to have small viewership with a very like refined group. So I just think it's, the metrics get really skewed, especially in things like social.
Big mindset shifts like you talked about. I think that's really what you're hammering home, is that this is possible. It does require a shift away from this like short-term metrics-driven mindset into a long-term mindset. I'm of the mind that a rising tide lifts all ships. So the more stuff like this that can get out there, and the more people that adopt it, the easier it's going to be for the sales profession to level up. So I'm all with you there. I do want to give you the chance to, I know we talked about a lot of stuff. If there was one like thing that someone listening to this should remember and try to take back to their organization and actually do, what would that thing be? The one that someone should try?
Yeah, for me, it's customer insights, right? Like, I don't give a crap.
I thought that would be your answer.
If you know a single thing about your product, it does not matter. I don't mean this because you can't speak intelligently about the thing you sell. I mean, if you understand your customer's workflow, the day in their life, the problems that they have, what it's like to be that job title persona, when you sit down and think through their eyes, you will see your product rise and insert itself into the flow. Like, it'll make perfect sense if you spend the time to be that expert. And like, so few organizations really do this, because what happens is you're like, man, yeah, this job really sucks. It's really annoying to do this thing over here. Or like, man, I couldn't imagine if this is me, I'd really want to know more about this. And it's like, oh yeah, we have this tool that does exactly that. Or there's this service that delivers exactly this, right? Like, it's too abstract. And you only know that through hearing from people who've got the vision, who've had those experiences. So sales management, like, you've got to extract that stuff out and make your people study that like the gospel, and then bring in product and keywords and all that other stuff, because it'll fit in hand in glove once they become just like obsessed with the customer problem and their day in the life.
I really like that. It's flipping the onboarding and training motion a bit on its head and going, listen, this is why people use us. Really understand that. You don't get to know anything about not anything, but product features. No, jargon? No. Like really focus on the customer. And then, like you said, every other puzzle piece kind of fits in place after that. I really like that.
Spot on.
Sweet. Well, thanks for hopping on the show and chatting, Sean. I appreciate it. I certainly think there's a lot that someone who's listening to this, sales leadership, can take back to their org and really start making this change. If you're not doing customer insight stuff already, now is the push. Do it. Sean told you to. If people want to get in touch with you, learn more about yourself, IRAD, continue the conversation, how can they do that?
You can cold call me at, no, just kidding.
Do it.
No, I'll leave you with some value. I don't want to tell you about value. I want to show you some value, right? So I'll give you some links. One link is going to be a Google Doc that has how we run our customer insight interviews, the questions we ask, what the structure looks like. Sales management teams, it's very simple. It's not super like in the weeds, but you can really shape that for extracting those insights. The other thing I'll leave you with is a LinkedIn Help Center library of how we use a lot of the sales nav filters and features and how we run those searches and plays, which might be helpful. Other than that, just a follow on LinkedIn is always helpful. We try to share as much useful content like this as we can.
That's awesome. Those are two incredibly tactical resources that I will absolutely include in the show notes here, because that's awesome to be able to give something to people. It's one thing to talk about it, but then to show them what it is, like you said, bring that value. I'm sure a lot of people will get their hands dirty playing around with that, which is always nice. Awesome. Well, thanks again for being here, Sean. Really appreciate it. Thanks to you for listening and watching. Remember to subscribe to the On Demand series to get more stuff like this in your inbox, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Sean.
Thanks, AJ.